Da 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 dee da 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 dee. Da 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 dee da 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 dee. One night in Bangkok and the world's your oyster. Da 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 da. Hello everyone. Right then, today we are talking about the Battle of Winchelsea. And I'll make sure my phone is on silent because it was supposed to be. I'm not sure why it's only made a noise. And that is a battle which takes place in 1530. Now, let's think about that one. 1530. Takes place on the 29th of August, 1350, I mean. I said 1530, didn't I? Oh, I'll spin it around. Okay, yes, fine. I'm going to give you a biscuit. But in return, stop blackmailing everyone. You're not allowed to blackmail people with your poodle eyes. Hello everyone, so Battle of Winchelsea from 1350. Why has the camera gone off for a little wonder? Hello? Well, that's not helpful. Why are you doing that, camera? I'm sitting here. You also appear to have done some... Ugh. Right, let's move just a tad and reorganize you, because obviously somehow my chair has moved position from where I set this all up earlier. I'm not sure how, but it has. So there we go. Let's update the PTZ of the record setting. Hello everyone. Ay, caramba. There's a lot of fun being had this evening. There is a lot of fun to be had this evening. Now, good evening to all. Hello on YouTube, on Twitch, and on every other system this is going out on. Because I'm presuming there are aliens listening. We are going to be talking about a battle which took place 29th August 1350. Now, think about that. We're talking about a battle which took place 675 years ago, as of the 29th of August 1350. $675 years ago. Now, why would I be talking about this particular battle? Well, because it's interesting from a leadership perspective. It's also interesting from a who was taking part perspective, because it's King Edward III and the Black Prince, Edward the Black Prince, and against a guy called Charles de la Cerda. Cerda works for the Crown of Castile, but he's at this point he's in the employ of the French, and we'll talk about that later. So this is an Anglo-Spanish battle off the southern coast of England, off Winchelsea. And it's one of those various naval battles which actually mean that King Edward III gets a bit of a reputation as a naval commander. We're talking about the same guy who'd done the Battle of Sluys a few years earlier, which I've talked about before. Basically, if you had two chances, you could probably succeed and get away with causing a lot of trouble at sea, as long as you didn't get to the point at which the king was called in. The moment you were causing enough trouble, the king had to come himself. He brought everything, and he had a disturbing habit of winning the battles he fought. Others might lose the battles. Edward III, he was not that courteous or nice. It is 1350, not 1530. It is 1350. Camera does have mine on its own many, many times. Now, this boy's actually been quite naughty because he's supposed to have his ears up like this at the moment. But everything we keep putting back there, he keeps shaking off or scratching out. So what he doesn't realise is whilst he has won the battles today, tomorrow he gets a bandage, don't you? You think you've been very clever, but tomorrow you get a big bandage wrapped around your head. Hee! You thought the Boodle Bun was a bad case of fashion disaster. Wait until you see what you're wearing tomorrow. The bandage scarf. Yeah. So, this all takes place during the 100 Years' War. And, well, the Edward III stage of the 100 Years' War is interesting for many, many reasons. It's the starting point of the 100 Years' War. You might have realised that the 100 Years' War goes from 1337 to 1453. 1350 is the starting point. It's the early point. It's still at the very close to the beginning. And yes, you might have worked out that the war, 100 Years' War, actually lasts 116 years, 4 months, 3 weeks and 4 days. Yeah, we're historians. We name it the 100 Years' War. It's actually 116 years. You know, that's close enough, right? That's close enough. Ugh, nope. Now, he's a very fashionable poodle. Now, the thing is, this war starts because Philip VI of France doesn't like the situation he's in, whereby the kings of England are also technically his dukes in charge of large parts of France. The Angevin Empire and its remaining territories. And the thing is, he is trying to force a circumstance whereby he forces them to give it up or to pay him homage. And there had been ways this had been dealt with in the past. It's always a problem when a nearby king is technically a duke in your area because it can cause all sorts of international relations and diplomatic problems. So usually what you do is the king pays homage, but he's coming to you as part of a treaty negotiation or something else. So the paying homage for his ducal lands is a small part in an overall event, in a wider discussion. And that works quite well. It's like when we are, I don't know, treating someone for their particular illness, and I can't think who, and we do a lot of patting, a lot of praising, a lot of hugging, a lot of bickies, and eventually, and so the small part where they have their tablets is only a small part of the overall discussion. And that had usually worked quite well. It had usually worked quite well. But, and I do mean this, but it wasn't enough for Charles IV of France, Charles VI of France, Philip VI of France. Sorry, there are so many Charles and Philips currently going through my head for this. It's going to be fun, and don't get me started on the Edwards. So, you have a problem. There is another reason why Philip VI of France is being this problematic. You see, Charles IV of France dies without any sons or brothers. And so they start looking around. Now, technically, Charles's closest male relative was his nephew, Edward III of England. Isabella, his Edward III's mum, had been Charles's sister, And whilst Isabella did claim the throne in name of her son, the French nobility in the Estates General rejected this on the basis of the 1317 decision, which had claimed that women do not succeed in the Kingdom of France. I think that was something they took very personal, because just look at how bad France has been at continually electing female leaders. You know, women do not succeed in the Kingdom of France has been their rule since 1317, and I don't think they're going to be changing anytime soon. I'm joking, of course, but it's always a fun one to bring up. Anyway. The French barons decided that they would pass it to his patrilineal, i.e., basically they go up and go down again, cousin, Philip, the Count of Valois, who had been regent already on the death of Charles IV, and whilst Edward protested, he submitted and did homage for Gascony. It was fine. However, this was not enough for both parties. You have a King of England who now feels a bit slighted and a bit annoyed, but isn't really too interested much in it, because he's already got the rich parts of France. He doesn't want anything else, realistically. But you have also a French king who is being... how do I put this? He's unsure of it. You see, the thing is, he might in theory be the king, but how secure does he feel on his throne? And so in 1337 he decides to confiscate the Duchy of Aquitaine and the County of Ponthieu. Now, why does he do this? Why does he do this? Because, honestly, the French king was starting to feel worried for his position. And he thought that England was going to be busy enough with Scotland, he could get away with it. He wanted to strengthen and create a unified France on his own command. And let's be honest, having your largest baron, your largest duke, the person who's the richest duke of you, is also king of your next door neighbour, is not a good position to be in as a king. Let's put it this way, I can see Philip's position. I can also see Edward III's position. One is securing his throne and the right of his line to inherit, and trying to run a country. The other one is going, hang on, that's a lot of my money. That is a lot of money. All these things are critical. Now, the thing is, the war starts, and, well, Edward's initial strategy is to try and build alliances with continental allies. Starts off with the 1373 Anglo-Portuguese Treaty. Kind of a famous treaty. But it will end up leading to the 1386 treaty. But, you know, that's the Port Anglo, the Perpetual Alliance. And, well, it does have the result of Louis IV of the Holy Roman Emperor naming Edward III the Vicar General of the Holy Roman Empire. It's kind of an interesting title, because anyone who knows Edward III as a person would not consider him a vicar general. Realistically, would not. He was fairly faithful to his wife, Philippa of Hainault, as far as we understand it. It's a bit sort of, it's the way of the times to an extent, but it does seem to be that he was kind of careful. That might be due to the fact that not long ago the English had had trouble with some various interesting relationships in the royal family. So maybe making sure that the stuff, anything which does comes from your queen, was quite a good idea. But he'd had Edward the Black Prince, Isabella, Countess of Bedford, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, John, Duke of Lancaster, Edmund, Duke of York, Mary, Duchess of Brittany, Margaret, Countess of Pembroke, and Thomas, Duke of Gloucester. So yeah, they'd had, and also they had a daughter called Joan who died due to Black Death as well. So they'd had quite a fairly large number of children, I would say. It's quite a successful marriage from that perspective. It's quite a fruitful one. I think it's roughly 9 children. So, Vicar General. Vicar General. And I would add at this point that Philip VI, well, he is, how do I put this, not quite as fruitful. He was a minor royal. He was very much a minor royal, and if it hadn't been for the fact that his forebear had no children, he would probably have never got anywhere near the royal family. But he was an able politician. He was an able politician. He was not a good at international relations. He was very good at understanding local politics. But not good at international relations. So this is the scenario you have which leads to war. You basically have, and I will emphasize this again, the Duchy of Aquitaine, the County of Ponthieu, all these things, they are very wealthy, very rich, and very useful to the English crown. And yet, for Philip VI of France, and I realise there is a whole thing. There is a whole thing about, Philip summons Edward to pay homage to him. Edward is busy doing something, so Edward sends back a message basically saying, I'll get to you later, I do apologise, but I need to deal with this thing first. Philip takes great umbrage with that, because after all, he's your sovereign lord. But he's sovereign lord of you in your ducal role. You're busy in your regnal role. There is a difference going on here, and this is again the problem. And so you have the early Edwardian phase of the 100 Years' War. And this is where a lovely phrase starts to enter the English language, which is called the chevauchée. Now, the chevauchée is pretty much when you do things which make Sherman's march to the east look like a nice day in the park. I am sorry. I realise that for many Americans, hearing that is going to be sacrilege, but honestly, the things they get up to in this time would actually make Sherman's march to the east look like just a march. It really was. Until you have used spears in quite as many ways you can for displaying human bodies, you really haven't worked out how to do a chevauché. Until you have got full of the joys of what you can do to various French properties, you haven't done a full chevauché. The thing is, you can tell the difference between a chevauché and a march. There are survivors from one. The other one tends to wipe out places. And that is the march of the chevauché. Now, one of the things Edward does like to use is the fact that, thanks to the way his empire, the Angevin Empire was set up, the way England and the French areas under control were set up, there's a huge amount of seaborne trade, especially with the Gascony area. There's a huge amount of seaborne trade. Remember, Mark Wren, at this point, war crimes were not a thing anyone cared about. There were winners, there were losers. And there was whose side was God on. And there's politics. And there's making examples of people so you don't have to do it again. In the nicest way, there are parts of my own family history going back to this period where, fairly certain, reading between the lines, they had a policy of let's sack and really destroy one village and then the next 5 will open their doors very helpfully for us. That's the kind of thing they think in this period. And there's no discussion of reconstruction or rehabilitation. No, there's just annihilation. Chevauché is basically licensed to do whatever you like. It brings out the worst in humanity, whilst also bringing out the best. And remember, this is also the period when some people would look back and go, well, that was the period which was really honourable. Especially when they talk about their grandfather's day. Because they'll hear the good stories from their grandparents and the good stories. And so that's the period of real honour. I would say a lot of the modern concepts of honour, of chivalry, of even some of the ones when it comes to Japan and etc. And countries like with their histories. You know, Japan I use the example because of course they have the whole samurai code, etc. Some of the things we are talking about today as being honoured parts of those codes, or honoured parts of chivalry, are things which were added on later. Which make it look good and look nice. Yeah. No. A vicarage tea party, this is not. There again, having once or twice been involved in planning sessions in parish halls for certain events, I would say that there is a significant crossover in terms of the level of diligent planning and perspective of political evil going on, but leave that to one side. Oh, yes. And the thing is, the Edwardian phase is brutal. It is absolutely brutal. And he's created new nobles. You know, one of the interesting things is that Edward the Third was a good politician. He was an able general. He was a good strategist. There are lots of things to say about him. But what is most worthy to talk about him is that he is a logistician. And this is why he's quite so scary. This is one of the reasons why he wins battles. There is literally no time he goes into a battle, he does not have supplies. When you look at some of the reports of them going, he was complaining because he was down to the bare minimum supplies. And you look at the supplies he's carrying, his bare minimum is more than whole armies would be consuming in later wars. Whole armies were much bigger than the army he was fielding. The man is a monster. And part of his thing, the logistics of this was he created in March 1337, when the 100 Years' War began. He created 6 new earls. He added 61 new men to the lords who had lesser titles. They added to the nobility. Why? Why was he doing this? Why was he adding these people? Well, he is creating lines of recruitment in the feudal system. He is creating multiple new conduits from regions to the royal army, so he can recruit more effectively. It works. Now, the Edwardian part of the war is quite interesting from the command structure perspective, because Edward always sticks himself usually at the centre of the command. And then he has various people who are trusted as generals. You fail, you don't get a second chance. You succeed, you get many other chances. He trained his sons well. The Black Prince was especially effective. It added to the propaganda value of his claim for the French throne, but it was also quite useful to pick sometimes commanders who were not of the royal family. He liked to have Knights Banneret. Now, Knights Banneret are a knight who leads a company of troops. So they might have a rank of knight, but that's their highest rank. But once they're a knight, they're allowed to have other troops, including other knights, follow them. So basically, if you consider them in a way of field commission, you have a soldier who's good at fighting, but they don't have a noble title. So you make them a knight, and then you hire them, you give them money to hire troops. And that's the Knight Banneret. And those are the professional soldiers you hear turning up later on in Italy and places like that. That's where they come from, the Knights Banneret. And they were very popular for the king because they allowed him to have personal troops. But they would also be sometimes used to lead armies because they were effective. And the lords would be told, no, Sir So-and-so's in charge. Why? Because whilst he's not noble, he could kill all 3 of you without even flinching and still carry out this campaign. So you're going to follow his orders, or I will make you. It was well effective. There's a later campaign where the Earl of Pembroke shares command with a guy called Sir John Tandus. Later appointed Seneschal of France by Black Prince, he was the equal. He was considered the equal as far as the king's was concerned. And when Pembroke caused a fuss, Pembroke was reminded of this. Now, realistically, the battles at Crécy and, well, mainly Crécy, was the big example of this. The big battle. That's what happens in this particular essay. And again, when Edward does a major offensive, he does it properly. He turns up a force of 15,000 men. He sacks Caen. He goes and he then marches across northern France, aiming to meet up with the Flemish in Flanders. He would have been quite happy not to meet up with the French, because frankly he didn't feel he had the force for it. But he found favourable terrain, and so he set up a battle and told Philip VI, you can come fight it. And that is, of course, the battle where the English army of roughly 7 to 15,000, depending on your perspective, depending on how many you think have been lost, etc., various points, defeats an army of somewhere in the region of 25,000. Now, the French in that battle lose between 1,500 and 4,000. The English lose between 100 to 300. Philip VI is wounded. And that's bad enough. But they're also King John of Bohemia is killed. He's the blind king who goes in with his knights riding with him. The Count of Blois is killed. The Duke of Lorraine is killed. The Count of Alençon is killed. A battle of Crécy is an absolute annihilation of the nobility of France. It possibly helps them later on in the war because it gets rid of some very interesting dead wood, but leave that to one side. This battle happens because whilst the French had been trying to carry out a scorched earth policy, the English had managed to keep themselves to an extent supplied. And they managed to keep pushing on. And then the French, as said, you find a nice bit of land, the English are happy to use it. The French army, they shouldn't have used it. The French army should probably have, and the more you look at the various maps of the areas of the Battle of Crécy where we're fairly sure it takes place, and you look at the terrain, it was not suitable for cavalry, not in the weather it was. But this is one of the things. Philip VI was really not that reliable when it came to martial decisions. He was far more of a politician than he was a strategician or a tactician. Which probably explains why he has more success when he does employ people who are not him. He hires mercenaries. Now the thing is, all that problem of Crécy, etc., was preceded by a further problem. Here's the thing. Why are the English able to do this? Why are the English able to just go from Portsmouth to land not far from Barfleur and wander around northern France and can supply themselves to an extent thanks to the rivers and the coastal region? That's one of the reasons why they do to an extent hug the coast. Well, as we talked about in a previous video on this channel, the Battle of Sleves was pretty darn nasty. This was where, in a previous battle, the English had, how do I put this politely, annihilated the French. Whilst Crécy and Poitiers are remembered as these big battles, these big land battles, they are not actually the most destructive battle of the war of the 100 Years' War versus the French. No. That is the Battle of Sluys, where basically the French come with a cunning plan of how to defend the place. They chain all their ships together so they can't manoeuvre. And the English fleet comes up, and the forces are not too dissimilar in strength. There's between 120 to 150 ships on the English side. There's roughly 213 on the French side. And the French are all in wearing full armour, ready to fight on their ships. And their ships are chained up. And the English go, well, that's good. And they start attacking from one end. The English basically do to the French at the Battle of Sluys what the Royal Navy, under Nelson, will do to the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. They start at one end and work their way down. And the trouble is for the French, they were all wearing full heavy armour. So when they fell in the water, they died. So they lost between 16 and 20,000. And that's the good estimates. That's the positive estimates. We know they lost 166 ships captured, and the standard practice in those days was if you capture a ship, you chuck all the crew overboard. You chuck all the crew overboard. The French lost 190 ships out of 213. 23 ships managed to make an escape. 24 ships were just sunk. 166 captured. You start working out 200 ships, each with roughly 100 crew aboard. I'd say 16 to 20,000, well, in excess of 100 crew aboard. I'd say in excess of 16 to 20,000 is fairly acceptable for that scenario. It was a devastating blow. And that's one of the reasons why the French Navy is in such a bad position. The French fleet basically ceases to exist at this point. That's why they're hiring ships from Castile. That's why they're hiring ships from everyone else. Because, frankly, they don't have enough of their own ships, and they don't have enough merchant mariners who are willing to fight the English. That was King Edward III's first naval battle. Just think about this. I have explained before how rare it is to have battles like the Nile, like Tashima. This is Sluys. You know, there's a running theme though with battles of annihilation like this at sea. It's usually when one side is either tied down or logistically cannot maneuver, and the other side can just annihilate them. Matthew Keeling. Lesson: don't let the English fleet fight just one end of your formation. Please learn by 1790. The French assignment grade failed. Yeah. Drac hasn't. Dan, if Drac tries to go swimming in armour, in the nicest way, we are all going to be there. And I am sticking a tether and a tether and an oxygen tank on him. Or I will carry the oxygen tank and stick the plug in here, stick the frickin' plug in his mouth, because I am not letting my friend, drown. In the nicest way, it's very simple. Armour is lovely. Armour which is wet is difficult to manoeuvre in. Armour which is wet and you're able to actually drown in, because it's deep enough, is not something you want to be near. People literally drowned in mud. So, am I going to take it that you believe, because I've just finished my own brew and therefore might get up to get another can, You therefore deserve something for me going to get another can of Iron Brew. I love you, but you're starting to turn this into an art form. You even look at the camera. Look at you. You can turn your eyes on the camera. Goodness sake. Ah. Oh. Hats instead. Now, I admit, this is the last Thursday live till November, so I picked out a topic I was going to enjoy, and I hope you've all been enjoying it. The Battle of as I said, is a particularly interesting one. But then we get to the geography of this war. So this is something which I want to include because I wasn't sure where to put this in this particular discussion. I know we haven't got to the actual battle yet, but I wanted to give all the context. So, the Angevin Empire is pretty much the dark purple area, originally. Gascony is a large part of what's left, as it was Poitou, and these are the areas where you get a lot of money from. A lot of English trade goes down to Gascony and back. There's a lot of wine going on. A lot of economics going into this warfare. A lot of economics going into this warfare. It's one of the interesting things when you start looking up the stats for the English trade with Gascony, and there is an important element to this is the supply of goods to the English and taxation of those goods and who the money should go to. Now, the English wool trade, of course, goes into Flanders, which was critical. That was critical for the economy. But the other point which was critical for the economy was the amount of wine, the amount of not just wine, but also other goods going through Gascony, which were coming from the Mediterranean. Quite a lot of trade would come up here, land on this on the Mediterranean coast of France, go across France by various means to Gascony and up to England. It was an expected route. It was a critical trade route. Some of the richest towns and the richest ports, especially, under the control of the English king, were in Gascony at this time. This was a critical area. It received a lot of funding as a result, because it deserved a lot of funding, but it also created a lot of money which went elsewhere. And when you're dealing with things like Scottish kings, who you occasionally have to have wars with, it does help. It does help. Now, admittedly, a lot of the Angevin Empire had been lost under King John. But the thing is, the kings who'd come after King John had done a pretty good job of defending their territories and of rebuffing the various kings' advantage. And plus, I would say very few of the French kings who came after him were Philip II. Philip II had been something special. Again, he was a good king. trying to look for the notes I've got about the actual stats of the economics of Gascony in under the trade routes. Oh yeah, there it is. So, when we are talking about the trade between these two places, between Gascony and England, we're talking 1,000 ships a year departing Gascony for England. There's 1,000 voyages a year. And that's in the 14th century. They were bringing over 100 million litres of wine. Now, in minimum a year. Now, for those who aren't sure what that is, in terms of gallons, which is always nice, and I'm talking about imperial gallons, that is nearly 22 million gallons of wine a year. So it's about enough to keep, I don't know, the city of Newcastle mildly buzzed for about 6 months. I'm not joking. I have, every time I go to Newcastle, even in the middle of winter when it's freezing cold, people are wearing less clothes than I do, and I tend to walk around all the time in a t-shirt and trousers. And I'm sitting there going, I know I have no feeling of the cold, but what do you lot all explain to us? And I've also seen the sheer amount of wine which is consumed around me. I love Newcastle, so it's a wonderful place to go to. So, yeah, it's a fun point. And Castile, Navarre, all these things, there is Spain is being fought over at this point. Spain is being very much fought of, but these people are still starting interconnections. The relationships between various different families are going on. And what you have to consider about Charles Lacerda, who we're going to be talking about today, is he ends up having a very interesting connection with France. Because he ends up becoming the Constable of France. And for those who don't know, the Constable of France is pretty much like the Lord Steward in England. Lord Steward is the King's most senior advisor and basically the King's right hand. If you want a Game of Thrones scenario, hand of the King. Or Queen. Now, he is a Castilian. But he's a Franco-Castilian nobleman, so it makes sense. He's the son of Alfonso de la Cerda and Isabel de Nanting, grandson of Alfonso de la Cerda, the Disinherited. Now, the Disinherited, well, we'll be getting into that one. That's a whole different fun thing. But it means, again, it's one thing to notice out when talking about nobles in this period. If someone is a disinherited noble, it means they come from a powerful family, but they're not allowed to inherit. So, as long as there are people they have a personal connection within the family around, they will have access to that power. But the moment they're gone, they're probably not going to have much of a connection with that family. So they have to use the power while they can to build up the family they can from scratch. The person we're talking about would, if his grandfather hadn't been disinherited, have a claim on the Castilian throne. Well, technically, the Leonese throne. History is fun. Now, if we're going to talk about Charles de Lacerda a lot, why is he hired? Why is it worthwhile going and get a Castilian naval officer, a Castilian nobleman, a Castilian mercenary? Well, here's the thing. Whilst the ships they are trading in at this point and sailing in are cog-like in shape, and I have a cog and a caravel up above and in terms of pictures, and there are similarities going on. The difference is a caravel built cog rather than a clinker built cog can often be built bigger, be built higher, and can be built to an extent stronger. And so if you go and hire someone who has a thirst for status and power, who has already proved themselves to an extent quite capable, who comes from a family with history and money and reputation and is therefore able to hire people, you can give them 20,000 florins a year and you can pay them to blockade the English Channel ports and prevent the trade of Gascony. And the thing is, they only have to do well enough to cause disruption, and anything they capture they get to claim as extra booty. So basically they're getting 20,000 florins a year as base pay, and on top of that, whatever they capture is theirs as well. Whatever they capture as well. It's a great way of privatising war, isn't it? Unfortunately, it means you don't really have much control. And to say that de Lacerda's forces behave more like pirates than they do naval personnel is to realistically put down the concept of piracy. Because they mainly prey on solo merchant ships. That's what they want to target. They come out in a large horde, about 50 ships, and they like to prey on solo merchant ships, and they will chuck their crews in the water. Whereas most of the sensible pirates at this time tend to not chuck the crews in the water. Anyone to guess why a sensible pirate wouldn't chuck a crew in the water, but a noble would? Anyone want to guess? Why do pirates show more mercy than nobles? Retaliation? That's a perspective lines. Slave trade, ransom, all these things come in. So the crew needed to surrender. Seneca Nero and Makucha right. Pirates are businessmen. They want them to surrender because then they don't have to fight. And they also want them to carry on trading because if the merchant ships stop sailing, they stop having someone to trade, i.e. capture. Now, the thing is, the nobles, I don't think the English could have turned around and offered him 25,000 florins to come and work for them, because, for starters, Edward III didn't see the point. He had his own navy. His navy hadn't been wiped out of Battle Sleece. His navy had been increased. And two, and this is the more important thing, honestly, this is kind of a mark of desperation. This deal, the power and influence granted, the basing in Flanders, all the stuff set up for Charles de Lacerda to allow him to do this, gives him an awful lot of power. Believe it or not, setting up a formation like this, and eventually his rise to Constable of France included, shows the weakness of the French throne rather than the strength. It shows how desperate the French throne is. But it does come with the advantage. There is an advantage to being this weak. You've got very good ships. And these are bigger and more powerful than most of the English ships. Because the English ships are mostly clinker-built vessels. Whereas, as I said, the Castilian ones, they're Carvel-built. So they're bigger, faster, better ships. It is interesting to note that in history, traditionally, pirates have cultivated the image of fear to get themselves things. But they're often not as scary as the people who are, how do I put this politely, the not pirates who are doing the same thing. Again, if you're fighting an enemy warship, you are more likely to be annihilated than if you're fighting a pirate ship. Because the rules of the game are different. One gets paid whether they bring home the prize or not. And one doesn't depend on continued prizes for income to survive. And one won't be bought off by you just going, right then, we'll give you goods if you let us keep our ship. With that being said, Shane's Book Club time. I know it's not often I do battles this far back, and that's because, honestly, I want to do more about battles from this period, but most of my good books on this period are still in boxes. Most of my good books on this period are still in boxes, and that's annoying. I would say you've got a bit of the stuff is in this book. Nicholas Rogers' Safeguard of the Sea. It's the beginning of his trilogy, which goes on Command of the Oceans, and of course, eventually to that one, Price of Victory. So basically, you have a 3-book series from Nicholas Rogers to cover pretty much up to the present day, from 660 AD to modern day. You've got 3 books. This is the earlier one, and it is, I'd say its size tells you a lot, because Nicholas Rogers writes a lot when he's got the information available to write it. This is what he's got to be able to write about what is pretty much 1,000 years of history. This covers 1,000 years. This covers 165 years. This covers 130 years. So that should tell you something about the sources and resources we have available. 1,000 years of history. Yeah, they're roughly 300. So that tells you, to my mind, the limits of information we have. But still, I recommend Nicholas Rogers as a starting place. I recommend Safeguard of the Seas as a starting point, because it does show those 1,000 years. I have a lot of books around me. It's quite useful. Yeah, no, up we go. Can you help? So no, in school and games, like, patricians' cogs are treated like behemoths of cargo and warships, and then you look at them and it's just a dinky little thing. Yeah, it is. They are not really long-range sailing assets. Some of them did do some long-range sailing, but yeah. Yeah, Caesar is weird, though. Let's be honest, Caesar is weird. So we have a Franco-Spanish commander bringing his mercenaries, and we have what he's doing and how he's annoying the King of England. And that's really one interesting thing, is because I don't think the Castilian ships ever realistically thought it would happen. You see, they were based in Flanders, which was traditionally the strongest point for French naval power. Traditionally, Dunkirk is where the French Navy comes from. Caesar is weird t-shirt when. Oh, that'd be a fun one. That'd be a fun one to do. But the thing is, in 1350, when this battle takes place, there's technically a truce. Two papal nuncios were brokering peace. And whilst the English and French were actively planning for renewal of the operations, there was peace technically being agreed. And the Castilians were specifically named. In mid-June, there's a truce agreed, and Philip VI ceases to pay them. However, the Castilian ships have got enough money in and are finding piracy being good, so they carry on as outright pirates. Think about that. They're carrying on as outright pirates. That's a good phrase. I have to admit, I can't own that phrase. I spotted that in the Wikipedia page. I've read many books, and a couple of books about it. 3 books, actually. It was a total I've managed to read on this battle for this preparation, and they all came with various things to try and describe it. They said they continued their operations, they continued unabated, they continued this. It was only whoever it is was the author or the person writing the Wikipedia page who just put it so simply. They continued on as outright pirates. I love it. I have no idea who that mysterious author of that particular page is, but you summed it up well. You summed it up well. And I would say, this particular battle, well, it's not exactly a long way into this book. In discussions. It really isn't. But with them carrying on, and the French not stopping them, well, the English king has a large number of ships, a large number of troops with nothing officially to do. What would you do if you were Edward III at this point? Do you want to disband your forces, send them home when you're just agreed a freshly new truce with the French? Or what do you want to do? I can tell you what Edward III does. He creates a coast guard. He has them arrayed around the places, and he knows exactly where the French are based from. They're coming from Sluys. They are coming from Sluys, where he fought that big naval battle, where he won. He knows they're coming from Flanders, from Sluys and Flanders, and this is a place that's where they're operating from. And he positions himself at Roverive, where there's a lovely little railway, by the way, Roverive and Dymchurch. There's a lovely railway. I highly recommend it. Now, he's at a different Roverive when he announces, he's at the one in London, when he announces he's going to attack the Castilians. Then he goes down to Sandwich and Kent and various other places, Roverive and Dymchurch, and one of the places he is at. He's at various points up and down the country. There was no little steam railway at the time, no. But if you want to look up something fun, look up the Roverive and Dymchurch Railway in World War II, and you will find some great armoured trains. Some really classic armoured trains. We'll leave that to one side. Now, by mid-August, he's basing himself out of Sandwich instead. He's decided that's better for his basing, but he's been all along the coast organising various things. And the thing I would point out about Edward is he has one advantage over the lovely Charles de Lacerda. Edward III seems to know what he eats for breakfast. He really does. He seems to know all sorts of interesting things. He knows his ships. He knows his commanders. He knows when he leaves base. He knows when he's preparing to leave the base before even Lacerda seems to know. Anyone would think that Edward III has a very active, very capable intelligence network going on in France at this point. And so, it's unsurprising when he learns that the Lacerda's fleet is sailing. What does he do? He brings together his highest nobility in England. He brings together everyone who has decent large ships. He makes sure all the ships are well fitted out with men-at-arms and archers, and whilst, yes, the Flemish have provided many of the crossbowmen to the Castilian ships, they are not as well provided with archers as he is. Edward III's brought a lot more troops. He has brought a lot more troops to the battle. And the thing is, well, I want you to think about something. One fires a crossbow like this. It's good for firing down. Now, normally, being higher up gives you an advantage. In battle, it does. But if you look at the ranges of engagement, the fact that ships close for boarding in naval battles in this period as a standard, they are basically land battles so you can see. If you've got a whole load of archers on your deck who are very practiced at doing that and watching the arrows go up and down, suddenly you in a higher position but close, it doesn't equal safety, does it? Now, I would say, as we're discussing the intelligence network, I would say it's worthwhile remembering, where does the wool industry go through? You see, Sleaze and all these places are a great place to base themselves from the perspective of the currents in the channel. Okay? But Flanders is also where the English wool trade goes through, which makes a lot of the people in Flanders very rich. You're disrupting their wool trade. They're not making money. The Castilians are making money, but they're losing money. There are a lot of reasons why people will be sending information. Remember, I mentioned the wool trade earlier at the beginning, for a reason. I have my suspicions about where the information was coming from. Anyway. Most of Edward's fleet are smaller ships than their Castilian counterparts, but he still has a fair number of them. And Edward is, again, quite clever. Now, again, you might have heard me talk about the Sir John Chandos earlier. This was him. The gentleman who, as a knight, would be leading troops. Anyway. He is sitting on the deck of his ship on the 29th of August, listening to minstrels playing what's called the German airs. It was nice to be having. And John Chandos is singing. At 1600 hours, they spot Lacerda's force moving towards them with an easterly wind. Thanks to the winds and the various things going on, the Castilians had actually become scattered, which means they are grouped up into various smaller forces. So, despite them theoretically having 47 ships which are larger to the English 50 ships, what they actually find themselves with is a group of about 10 ships, a group of about 24 ships, and a group of about 13 ships spread out. Spread out. And the English don't turn towards the Castilians. No, they don't. When the people up in the tops, the lookouts, report enemy sighting, Edward has his crew, has his people drink to each other's health. They sound the trumpet, and all the flags are put out, all the insignia. And with the plan being to grapple them, instead of which is where it's really quite clever, where Edward does something really quite clever. Instead of going straight for them and trying to get them, he realizes the Castilians are faster than them. But if the English therefore run into the wind and shorten the sails, the Castilians will come up to them, rather than them having to fight against the wind and putting themselves in a difficult position. He literally turns away from the enemy, shortens sails, and lets them come up to them. He's so confident they won't break off. He's so confident they'll come to him, because he realizes this is just too tempting a target. And this is what they do. It takes an hour. It takes an hour for battle to be joined. And then you have the difficult manoeuvre of the boarding. Well, the king's own ship, and you can't call them HMS, so it's king's flagship, but own ship, flagship. That's not really a good description for it either, because it's not really a command position, it's just where he's aboard. The Thomas, Well, it strikes the Castilian vessel it's attempting to grapple so heavily, it actually springs some leaks. First time. Second attempt, the grapple is successful. The archers manage to make all the Castilians attempting to drop large rocks on them scramble for cover. And, well, Edward had brought ladders. And other things to climb with. And so, you might have a taller ship. That's great. Here's a ladder going up. We're coming over. When he realizes his ship is sinking, by the way, Edward's policy is his ship is sinking. He will take the Castilian ship as his new flagship. And that's exactly what he does. He boards her. He fights the crew. He wins the battle. He tips the remainder of the crew who are left on the Castilian ship overboard. That's what they did at the time. And then transfers his flags all before the Thomas sinks. Oh, it gets worse. We have the fact that this is not the only ship. And by the way, a lot of English ships are lost in the boarding manoeuvre. A lot of them are. Who would have realised clinker-built ships do not like to be bashed into other ships? Who'd have thought it? Now, as the battle goes on, things get slightly worse. Well, worse for the Castilians. I'm not sure what it is for the English. The Black Prince. This one. Well, what can I say? He is trying to fight his way aboard another ship he's boarding, because he's had to before his own ship founds. They were in trouble. They were finding that the Castilian crew was hard fighting, and they hadn't got a secure position as Edward III had managed to. Plus, you have to remember, Edward III had numerous very interesting people from Cornwall alongside in his crew, who made sure he got aboard the ship. This is the thing. Edward III does tend to bring some very good, very solid professional fighters with him. One of them, by the way, was that young man who had been singing, John Chandos, who apparently, in this battle, took out about 4 or 5 people who got in his way. Very effectively. 2 of them at the same time. Edward III was having trouble. But don't worry. Henry of Lancaster, a good friend of his father, and that's the short one, at the time, later to be given a far more senior title, before eventually he died, well, noticed that his, basically godson as far as he was concerned, was in trouble. So, Lancaster boarded hard. They had the prince had far less time to depart his ship to board the Spanish vessel they'd taken, and they'd taken it with the aid of Henry of Lancaster. But don't worry, it carried on. Now, the crossbowmen were proving especially interesting. They could, after all, as said, fire down, and they were also dropping various bits of iron and other various weights on the English vessels to cause damage, and this was part of the reason why the English were losing the ships. But they were still doing okay. they were still managing to push through. And pushing through wasn't easy, but pushing through was being done. It was being done. At this point, towards the end, and they'd carried on fighting until quite late at night, the Lascelles de Roy, which was carrying Edward III's household, some of his household warriors and household family members, commanded by a Flemish officer, Robert of Namur, had been grappled by a Castilian vessel and was actually being dragged off. But a valet of Robert's aboard, called Hannequin, boarded the Castilian, cut the halyards of her mainsail with his sword, and the Castilian vessel at which point got promptly swarmed by other English ships, which took it, including, again, Lancaster. I would like to say, this battle really, Henry of Lancaster doesn't get enough attention for this battle. He basically spends the battle racing around going, "Oi, you! Are you winning against some of my colleagues? I'm gonna rough you up now." You know, there's the one with the Prince of Wales where it basically goes, "You're gonna take out my godson? I'm coming for you." And then he just goes, "You're taking on this random other English ship? You're not having that. I'm coming for you." Just various points in the battle, he just turns up, storms a ship, and goes, "Here, have a ship. I'm off to do another one." He is one of the richest nobles in the country. He literally has no heirs. He should not be doing this. And yet, yep, hello, here I am. There be some Frenchies for me to beat up. It's just the whole time. It is, if you've already written in it, there is some very much Monty Python going on. Henry of Lancaster, one of the coolest characters you're ever going to find in history. Absolute frigging nutter. I mean, I swear the Black Knight might have been modelled on him in some regards, because at one point in this battle, he apparently has a gaping wound on him, and he still goes, "We ready, lads? We're off the board." And it's a case of, "Sir, you can't hold a shield." "Oh, that's fine. You're there, lad. You'll be my shield. Let's go." Mace in hand, clambering up, mace in the good hand, one arm not being used, clambering up the side, boarding, bashing his way through. He makes Robert in Game of Thrones, in the sort of mythology of that, look like a blooming amateur with a warhammer. The man is absolutely nuts. Wonderful, but absolutely nuts. Henry Lancaster has to be, yes, Brian Blessed will be perfect for it. He is this wonderful character, and you just look at him and go, "Okay, so should you be doing this?" Yes, of course. He was the, and if you look at some of the battles he's taken part of already, he's taken part in the Battle of Slees. Took part in the Siege of Berwick, the Battle of Haydon Hill, Finnish Campaign, Siege of Cambrai, the Battle of Bergerac, the Battle of Arbruch, the Siege of Aquilon, the Chevauchée of 1346, the Siege of Calais. He took part in Crusades. The man was an absolute nutter. He only had daughters, and he got them off and married off quite well. He did get his daughters married off quite well. But he was one of Henry III's most trustworthy and trusted senior officers. And in this battle, he earns every single one of the credits he deserves. Every single one. He doesn't die till 1360. 1361, actually. It's March 1361. I thought it was March 1360 from memory, but no, it was March 1361. Probably from the plague. Now, there is a dispute of this because he made his will 10 days before his death, which is unusual with the level with plague, because usually you die more quickly than that. But there is a goodly argument that this is a man who was not going to go quietly into the night under any any circumstance, and if anyone was going to make the plague last long, it was going to be the not quite 51-year-old Earl of Lancaster. He was, well, Duke of Lancaster, actually, by that point. He'd been made a Duke. He was made the first ever Duke of Lancaster. He didn't have any issue to carry on the title. It's why it became actually the royal family. And eventually now, if you don't know, the royal family are the Dukes of Lancaster. And it's all, in many ways, in honour of this man and what he does for Edward III. But we'll leave that to one side and the politics around it and how it comes about. But this is the point. This is a man which will not go quietly into night. And this is one of many nobles Edward III has like this at this battle. This is one of the reasons why he's able to do the campaigns he has. He's got an absolute block of nutters. He may have known the plague was coming and done his will before catching it. Potentially he knew the plague was in the area and so he did his will beforehand, but there's also the scenario where, you know, if anyone's going to fight the plague, it's going to be him. Oh, the Duchy of Lancaster, yes, it's an interesting thing. So, yeah. And I thought I'd include a bit of Robin le Mer, because Robin le Mer is another interesting officer. You know, this battle is just full of them. And this is really the point. When you start looking at this battle, and you start looking at the people involved in it, le Mer and Jean Froissart are two of the main sources about all the events of this battle. There are also some other records from people like Thomas Walsingham, Robert of Aylesbury, and a few others. But the thing is, and I would say it's worthwhile reading Rogers' book, especially Nicholas Rogers. The thing is, though, with all this bit of history, this is one of those battles which doesn't get talked about. And the thing is, does it solve the piracy problem? No, because the Castilians, enough of them do survive. Enough of them do survive. The surviving Castilian ships managed to flee to French ports, and they continuing harassing the English shipping for the rest of the year. And they still manage to try and cause issues. But the thing is, the trade with Gascony is not really as affected as the French would like it to be, because whilst they can get into the Eastern Channel, they can't get into the Western Channel. So most of the trade with Gascony moves to ports like Plymouth. To an extent, Southampton becomes the most easterly one they're using, and Falmouth, etc. And there also is the trade is valuable enough. There's often quite a capable force with them. And one of the interesting things it does is that with the ships being used to use these ports in West England, it forces the English to make a lot of investments in infrastructure, roads, etc., in order to move trade from where it's arriving in various ports to where it needs to go, because the markets for these goods are mostly in London, are mostly in the big port hubs places. Yes, he was also known as Henry of Grosmont, Dan Freeman. And yes, the Castilians, when it moved into Cornish waters, were less, yeah. But realistically, it starts to lead to various other things. There is I would say in this battle as a result, the other thing you have to consider is there were lots of English ships. There were. The Castilians seem to lose more. We know there's a roughly 10 or so English ships lost in the battle. There's a debate. There are some figures put as low as 2. Ours put as high as 15. But we're fairly sure, we think it's rough. I think from most of the sources, I'd say roughly 10. They seem to capture 26 of the Castilian ships. And the reason we are fairly certain on the ships they capture, and let me explain this reason. One of the reasons we are fairly certain they capture so many of the Castilian ships is the fleet, a number of ships which are brought back to England. Now, the thing is, for the English to have returned with the ships they did capture, with 64 ships, they couldn't have lost any ships. Right? And 2 more ships turned up slightly later. So roughly 56 ships seem to go back to England from the engagement. They went out with 50 ships. So, we know roughly 20 Castilian ships get back to Flanders. The odds are there seems to be quite a lot of ship exchange going on. Okay? A lot of the clinker-built warships seem to have seen better days. Pardon me, I think I just burped that. And, yeah. So, but we're not 100% sure. And there are definitely heavy losses on both sides. There are heavy losses on both sides. But no. After the battle, well, Charles de Lacerda survives and is then made the Constable of France, which is also a good thing to make him because it stops him going to carrying on these operations. And 6 years later, well, the English launch another expedition. This is the Black Prince's Chevauchée of 1356, which leads to the Battle of Poitiers, which then leads eventually to the 1360 Treaty of Brittany. And, well, that sort of ends the first phase. The first phase of the 100 Years' War. And honestly, the first phase of the 100 Years' War ends with the English having gained territory. Edward III, the Black Prince, you know, again, Philip VI was just, he was good in some ways at politics. He was not good at the fighting the English side of it. It just wasn't. And when you look at France afterwards, it is a nation where a very substantial, very rich section of it is not doing well. Not doing well. So that being said, it's now going to be, if I can get the bot working, so give me a second, question time. And I did aim for one which was going to be a little bit shorter, because I knew this was going to be the last Thursday live for a while. They're all going to be premieres for the next couple of months. And so I thought there'd be a lot of questions. And so I'm hoping the bot's going to work. Which means I'm hoping StreamBot's going to work. Because if it isn't, then I'm going to need to... We'll see what we can do. We will see what we can do. Seneca, have you noticed a banner appearing yet? There's going to be brew ships every Sunday. Brew ships are going to carry on Sundays. But it's just the Thursday lives are going to stop while I prepare for Japan trip. Although, to be fair, on the Japan trip, because the house sale hasn't gone through, I still haven't actually booked my tickets or anything. So, yeah. We'll leave that to one side. The bot should be working, he says. No, for some reason a version 0.28 is working, not the version I needed. Okay. Until I put Seneca. Until I put the banner up, it's not working properly yet. Let me wait and have it. It's either that, or you're going to end up running the system, standing in for the bot. See, the bot's just updated to a new version. Well, that's what it's claiming. Streambot's updated to a new version. The new Streambot 1.0. Hopefully this will be sorted out soon. He says, sorry to cause this trouble. No, I'm not going to cat o' nine tails powder monkey. Streambot has just updated, and the new system looks very, very good once it's working. But it's going to be once it's working. And it's a case of maybe it needs me to get the new things for it. The bot could always decide all sorts of fun things. No, it's not working. The bot's not working. It's just freezing. It says it's working, but it's not showing up as an actual accessible thing. The version it is showing up is the old version, which shouldn't be on there. I'm going to have a long argument, Streambot. I will do. I'll use some of the points. You know, there's going to be brew ships on Sunday. There's going to be a sci-fi brew ships on Sunday. It's a sci-fi brew ships, and hopefully I'll have guests there. But what I'm going to do is put up a questions live sign. And if any of the admins in the chats, in either the Twitch or the YouTube, can stick them in the brew ships Q&A questions, I'll go from there. And sorry about this, thank you. Again, apologies. Sneakernet time. He says that. And, well, then it seems to be sort of connecting. Sort of. We'll see. We'll see. It might work at some point. It might work. But let's go to this and see if I can spot questions. So we have... there you go. Seneca has already put in. Seneca is doing it quite quickly. Thank you. Would it be a compromise, Seneca, would it be a compromise to give the King of France a duchy in England so both could have swear fealty to each other, and in a few generations an English queen, regnant, can marry a French king? That would require a lot of long-term planning and a lot of friendship on both parts. Plus, to be honest, the French kings didn't want duchies in England. They thought England was a cold and terrible place. And also, if you give him a duchy in England, that means you have to give us some of the lands in England. And that can mean you could end up having the problem of a French mighty subject yourself. So no, you don't do that. As tempting as it might be, you don't do it. It'll just cause you too much trouble in the long run. It will do. Let's see. What's the next question down here? Okay. Andy Rudolph's question. Have I tried turning off on again? Yes, I have multiple times. Thanks, Seneca. Right. What be going on? Oh, we'd be answering questions. Princess Sinead, aka Yuki. Dan Freeman. Does Powder Monkey get a Kid of Ninetails just to, or just their Iron Brew as punishment? In terms of the bot, which is called Powder Monkey, for those who don't know, it merely gets me reinstalling it, and uninstalling and reinstalling it often, it seems to be. Michael, Eddie Rudolph, did the English start building cogs of the Ulster after they captured the Southern? Yes, this is the point at which the English start adopting some sort of caravel construction, and that's when it starts to become the standard later on. But you have to remember there's a lot of yards producing clinker-built ships, and it's very cheap and easy to do so. And also, you have to remember, especially at these points, the treatment of wood and understanding the care of wood and how you keep the wooden ships going in the weather that they were put into, and subject to the terror, the torment of the North Sea, etc. They were put through. It isn't up to the standard of what we do today, what we were doing later in the Age of Sail. So this was a time of development, let's say. Michael Cooch, if you could time stop Henry Lancaster, command participate in any naval battle from the future, which battle would he drop into, and how much fun would he have? Oh, it's got to be the Battle of Camperdown. Henry of Lancaster and Admiral Duncan would just be having a ball at Camperdown. In case of, ooh, boarding! We come! We have fun! Oh, you bring mace. I bring 2 pistols and giant sword. Would you like to borrow a pistol? Thank you! Who would have probably ended up conquering France by boarding action? It's just, he is one of those, Henry of Lancaster is one of those unstoppable forces of nature every time he's in a battle. He's the guy who charges around going, victory! I know we talked about Brian Blessed, but actually almost, I think... how old is he? Honestly, Jack Black is probably better, but even he's a little bit old. You have to remember, at this battle, Henry of Lancaster's 40 years old. He's a couple of years older than I am. He spent his life fighting. Is the bot working? Oh, good lord. The bot is actually, to an extent, working. Okay, so the bot's decided to work. The bot's decided to work. You boy. But yeah, so you need to find a suitably rambunctious human being of about 40 years old to play Henry of Lancaster. And they were the need to pull it off. I think Jack Black is even a bit too old, so, and Brian Blessed certainly is. Carl Gasberg. By this time, AD 1350, was the secret of Greek fire lost even Byzantine, wasn't it? Pretty much by this point. It had been. It was a closely guarded secret, which meant the number of people who knew how to do it was very small, and the various internal issues in Byzantium had meant that they grew fewer and fewer over time, and eventually were gone. Look, I know what the Ralsonian calendar is. You want to be in bed by 9, with your biscuits, and your dinner, and your water bowl. But no one else in the family likes to go to bed at 9 o'clock. No! We're not doing it. No! I don't know where you got this from, that you need to be in bed by 9 and not rise before 11. But no. That's not how it works. We've been over this. I guess the close. Was there any artillery used there? I imagine it wouldn't have been about the right time. No, not at this point. There is artillery being used at this point. There is artillery slowly being developed in terms of the war, but it's not stable enough, reliable enough at all to be used. And these naval battles at this point are entirely boarding actions and archers. Yeah, it's going to be a while before you get to an actual artillery duels taking place at sea. It is, because also there's the fact it's how you store the powder to work in the atmosphere of a sea, because powder which gets damp doesn't go right, and also the weapons being used at this point. But to be fair, in Edward III's first chevauchée, he does take some bombards with him in order to allow him to siege places, but they are siege bombards. They're not used for anything else. New York before 472. What does the role of Vicar General entail? Honestly, it's a nice title, but it basically means you're a senior general for the Holy Roman Empire. Go fight people. Seneca Nero, how many of these ships could the British shipyards crank out in Napoleonic Wars? Why would they be cranking out cogs in the Napoleonic Wars? That would just be a very expensive waste of timber. A lot of them, but they wouldn't need to. They're building bigger vessels. Carl Gasberg, by this point, was the secret... Oh, I'll answer that one. There are all sorts of interesting things I can do. That's interesting. Sorry, the bots just told me all sorts of fun things I can set up in the bot. This I might have to do. New bot systems. Ooh. This could be interesting. Basically, Vicar does mean, to an extent, Lieutenant and Lieutenant General, but it's also more than that by this point. It is something associated with the Holy Roman Empire. It is associated with their presence. And, yeah. It's a fun bit of history. So cauliflower ears and broken nose and mandatory for Henry Lancaster. Look him up. Look up how many wounds he takes over his life and how much fighting he does. The man is up. Hello, Chris Hansen. Seneca, did closely guarded military technology secrets ever work out? Quite regularly. But there is a critical mass, and you do need to find some way of maintaining that mass. And the trouble is, every way you have maintaining that mass adds in a level of weakness. So, for example, writing things down in multiple copies of books and storing them in places means there are multiple books which can be stolen. Training people to do how to do things to retain it means there are people who can turn against you. Basically, military technology works in systems which are large enough and have a large enough buy-in of enough people that they are prepared to keep your secrets. Secrets don't work in systems where people don't have enough buy-in. This is why, disturbingly, democracies have proved to be more capable of keeping secrets than autocracies. Despite what you might read in some of the mythology which is written out there and some of the papers, democracies tend to be better at keeping secrets than autocracies. Because people have more of a buy-in. I know there's a fashionable discussion these days about rich people and whether or not they, whether their votes matter to them, as votes they can't have more of with their money, all these things and all that stuff. But realistically, in any scenario, any company, any organization is made up of a large number of people, and if they all have votes in a democracy, they're all bought into it. And you need, for you to keep something secret in terms of for a government, you need every level of the organization involved to feel like they have buy-in to a situation, not just the rich. What are you doing? Okay. You're being a poodle. Understood. Not realistically. There is often some things made about culture dependent upon these and ability to keep secrets, etc. But not realistically. It seems to be more level of buy-in people feel. It's one of the reasons why you have a very restricted pool of resources if you're looking at certain autocracies. Usually when you're talking about researchers for secret projects, in autocracies, their first question has to be, is this person sufficiently connected with the regime to feel bought in, rather is this the person who's most capable for doing this job. If you consider how did the Soviets get around the problem of having sergeants, they picked the people who were politically, already connected with the regime at a certain level, that they wouldn't make officers, but they could make sergeants. And they turn them into instantaneous sergeants, which caused all sorts of problems with the NCO formations of their forces. Rather than having professional NCOs, they had people who were trained to be instant sergeants. It's the same with researchers. It's a case of, okay, yes, this person might be our best doctor or might be our best researcher into physics or engineering, but if they're not sufficiently part of the regime, they're not going to be included on the secret projects, so you won't necessarily get the best technology. Maybe do a video on von Steuben. Maybe. But there's a lot of interesting stuff when it comes to secret keeping and technologies. Did they use armor at this point at sea? They were often wearing armor, but how much armor they would be wearing depended upon who you were. The Castilians and English both preferred to wear light armor for this kind of fighting, not heavy armor. And in fact, throughout the 100 Years' War, the English were often slightly more lightly armored than their French counterparts. The English favoured a more maneuver focus, which was okay if they were able to fight a maneuver focused battle. If they were forced to fight an attritional slogging match, in a scenario where the French were not bogged down in mud, etc., then they could find themselves in trouble. Yeah, it's working out what kind of level of armor you want. Again, what is light armor versus what is heavy armor? What are you wearing? One of the things also it's often harder to figure out, according to the French accounts these horses, is they think the English often seem to cover up symbology. Or rather, they've got a flag flying and that's enough, and they are not wearing all the fancy uniforms we associate knights with this huge display of heraldry on them and everything they're carrying, all sorts of things. And that's true in a land battle, because that can save your life. Basically, carrying all that heraldry on you tells you that someone might be prepared to pay a ransom for you, so don't kill me. If I get knocked over, don't kill me. Look at how wealthy I am. I can pay big money. But at sea, that stuff gets in the way. If you think about it, if you're climbing scaling ladders, and one of the interesting things about this battle is, to me, is that how many of the combatants are people like longbowmen and men-at-arms. They come very heavy in that kind of force, and that means they're professional soldiers. For the English army in this period, yeoman archers were professional soldiers. Men-at-arms were professional soldiers. They were professional soldiery. And that's often the English advantage. They have a very strong core of professional soldiery at this point. And they will fight in the way that they're going to fight. They will fight with shields. They will fight with, axes and other things. But again, what are they going to be armoured with? What are they going to be wearing? Are they going to be wearing light chain? Are they going to be wearing a brigantine? Are they going to be wearing various forms of, leather armour? And that does seem quite popular at this point. Various forms of leather armour and leather-based armour. Something which gives them some protection, but doesn't necessarily weigh them down if they hit the water. But there is also a realisation, I think there's another thing where the losses come from, is that if you do hit the water, you're gone. There's no survival. Oh, it's not good when first-term sergeants deal with final-term privates. Yeah, basically, first-term sergeants have no power over final-term privates in the communist system. In the Soviet Union, they don't. And in fact, final-term privates, i.e. the people in the last 6 months of their 2-year service, they pretty much get to write the show. They're the bosses. Seneca should sailors know how to swim? Yes. I've always believed you should. There again, I believe everyone should know how to swim, and I have been. I've done a lot of swim training for my little cousins at various points. Guess the clear. So to follow up on the display of hereditary, there were much slimmer chances of being ransomed at sea, at least in the 100-Year War. Yes, much slimmer chances. The standard practice at sea was if you capture a ship, the crew go overboard. The crew go overboard. It's easier that way. So yeah, you at sea you fight hard. You fight. It's a non-stop battle. It's a battle to the end. I add in also with Henry of Lancaster. It's like some of the people in this battle, the nobles who brought their own ships, their ships seem to be their own personal ships that they owned. They brought along, and again, whilst they are definitely cogs, there is part of me which wonders whether I like sort of what my family used to do when they were building ships, is that they would build merchant ships, but quite often for them, but they seem to be very heavily built merchant ships. You build a ship to last, sort of thing. No, no, no. You aren't supposed to be doing that. It was a moot point. Calm gas, but you put world borders using flotation devices like empty water skins, or was it's a moot point. You either succeed or you're gone. Especially in this scenario where your ships are the ship you're coming from is probably sinking as well. And again, I will point to you out that the customs in battle in this period were pretty harsh. Pretty harsh. It's one interesting thing is when you start talking to people. Well, when does the sanctity of life become part of the European battle space? And realistically, it's after the plagues. It's when humans become recognized as far more of a resource. Humans, as in the physical bodies, as far more of a resource. And that's when it starts to become more common to take large-scale numbers of prisoners. It doesn't not happen beforehand. Please don't get me wrong. It doesn't not happen beforehand. It's just more likely afterwards. And it's as you get sort of professional. It's, again, I think we'll point this out between the pirates versus the nobles, etc. See, the professional sailors the pirates were often the more professional sailors, which is enough reason why they tend to leave the people alive, because they're fighting the sea. That's going to kill them. The sea will always kill you if it wants to. It was still about nothing like the rules of war or Geneva Convention. There are still some rules, believe it or not. There are still some rules going around, and that's one of the reasons why are heralds as important as they are. What does the heralds do, etc. They often maintain order. They often maintain the safe spaces at the corner of the battlefield where people who are taken prisoner can go for safety. And that's often what they end up doing in battles, sort of it's a and yeah, if we consider the Battle of Agincourt as the example, which we'll talk about with heralds fought, and I quickly looked up. There's an English herald and a French herald, both watching the battle from a nearby hill, providing a safe point for the Battle of Agincourt. They agree that the English are the victors, and so they go to the King Henry V and tell him this. And he therefore earns the right to name the battle, because he's won. And it's Montjoy, the French herald, who informs the king of the name of the nearby castle, which the battle is named for. You have this on land. At sea, there's no herald ship. There's no herald ship sitting there going, oh, we can retreat to that. No. So heralds are sort of an interesting thing, as they're kind of like modern diplomats, I suppose, in some regards. No witnesses, no crime. Yeah, well, you know, what's easier to get away with in those days? Easier to get away with. Right, any more questions? Because the bot's working. The bot is working. That's it. Thank you, Christensen. And I'm going to keep doing some random stuff into various periods of history like this. Lives will begin as normal on the Thursdays in November. There will be one of the Thursday lives will be moved around, but I'll leave that to one side. And of course, one of the Thursday lives will be dropped because I'll be doing the Historiathon in November. That is all going to be in November. There's hopefully in October I'm going to be spending quite a lot of time in Japan. So fingers crossed, the house sale goes through soon, and I'm able to start booking that up, because otherwise I'm panicking it's going to get so much more expensive. I'm going to be crying. We'll leave that to one side. Before anyone thinks I'm leaving that too late, the house sale was supposed to go through in June. I won't say the exact scenario going on, but currently, hypothetically, it might be that there is someone in the chain who is acting for someone in the chain, let's say, who seems to have a very interesting idea of what timing is. And how important it is to get things done on time. Dan Freeman. Were there other major naval battles of the Middle Ages we don't normally think about that had big impacts on the historically better-known conflicts? Sleaze has a bigger impact, but as I said, it's not really thought about. I've already covered Sleaze. There are a few. And I'm going to slowly work my way through some of them, because medieval era battles are something which are not covered a lot of. Again, I will point to this. 1,000 Years of Naval History is a book this size. Just under 300 years of naval history. 2 books. Speaking as a naval historian, I know a lot happens in those periods, and I've taught stuff about those periods. But it's always fun. Oh, good lord, don't start on that, Michael Cooch. She would like to. It's not our people. Our people are doing exactly what they're supposed to when they're supposed to. Right, so we answered that one. Let me check if I've answered all the questions that have been submitted. Yeah. What's my favourite time period? It changes. Each of them offer different things. And that's why I like being a naval historian. I get to travel through it all. But, you look beautiful, but frankly, that is a toxic weapon. Okay. How many people are in the chain from my house? It's free. Right then. I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to go put someone in the garden, and I will be on Discord later to chat with everyone and hopefully answer some more questions. Thank you very much for being here. This is the coin which is actually minted for this event, because it's such an important battle as far as they're concerned. There is a coin minted for it. And yeah, what else have we got coming up? Next week it is the Battle of Actium, I think, isn't it? Is it the Battle of Actium? Yes, it's September. It's the Battle of Actium. And yeah, that's going to be the last gasp of the Roman Republic. Thank you very much, Sharon. Take care. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything. I'm going to go and put someone in the garden. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Oh, seriously, did you do another one? Take care, everyone. Thank you. Hello, Malta. Hello, Malta. Sorry I'm going just as you arrived. Thanks, everyone, for being here.